The July sun was a merciless hammer over downtown Chicago. For Nina, 7 months pregnant and a world away from her old life, the city blurred into a shimmering haze. A wave of dizziness washed over her, the concrete sidewalk seeming to tilt and sway. Her hand flew to her swollen belly, a protective instinct. Through the swimming mirage of heat and car fumes, she saw it. A familiar black Bentley, sleek as a panther. Inside, the silhouette of her husband, Dominic Vale, was unmistakable. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second. Then, the world went dark as the car smoothly pulled away from the curb. Dominic Vale felt the lurch in his gut before his brain processed the image. Nina. It was undeniably her. Her hair, once a cascade of honey-blonde silk, styled by the city's best, was now tied back in a messy bun, tendrils sticking to her sweat-sheened face. The bespoke maternity dress he'd bought her from a Parisian boutique was gone, replaced by a simple, faded floral sundress stretched taut over her prominent belly. But it was her eyes that pierced the tinted glass of his Bentley, wide with shock, then desperation, then a hollowing emptiness, just as she crumpled to the pavement. "Mr. Vale, is everything all right?" Mr. Takada, the Japanese real estate magnate Dominic had been courting for 6 months, asked from the seat beside him. His voice was polite but sharp, missing nothing. Panic, cold and sharp, sliced through Dominic. This was the final meeting, the culmination of a year's work to secure the lakefront development deal that would cement his legacy. The Takadas were old school, valuing honor, stability, and image above all else. What would they think if they knew the disheveled, fainting woman on the sidewalk was his wife? The wife he'd told them was spending the summer at their European villa. The lie had been so easy. His entire life was a carefully constructed facade, and he was its master architect. "Driver, go," Dominic said, his voice a low, steady command that betrayed none of the war raging within him. "Sir?" The driver, a new hire named Peterson, glanced in the rearview mirror, his brow furrowed with concern. He had seen her, too. "I said, go," Dominic repeated, his tone dropping to ice. He turned to Mr. Takada, forcing a seamless, charming smile. "Apologies. A momentary distraction. Chicago's vibrant street life." Mr. Takada nodded slowly, his gaze lingering on the spot where Nina had fallen before returning to Dominic. An unreadable expression settled on his face. The car accelerated smoothly, merging into the river of traffic, leaving the scene behind. For a few agonizing seconds, Dominic's neck muscles screamed for him to look back. He fought the urge, focusing instead on the blueprints laid out on the tablet in front of him. Control. It was all about control. He was Dominic Vale. He did not get distracted. He did not fail. But as the Bentley sped toward his gleaming skyscraper, the image of Nina's face was burned onto the back of his eyelids. He hadn't just left a stranger on the street. He had left his pregnant wife, the mother of his unborn child, unconscious on the hot summer pavement. And he had done it to close a deal. The chilling thought settled in his stomach, heavy as lead. It hadn't even been a difficult decision. Nina woke to the smell of antiseptic and the gentle beeping of a machine. A cool hand was on her forehead. She blinked, her vision slowly clearing to reveal a kind, weathered face framed by graying hair. A paramedic. "Easy now, ma'am. You took a bit of a tumble," the man said gently. "You're okay, and baby's heartbeat is strong." Relief washed over her so intensely it felt like a second wave of fainting. She was in an ambulance. Outside, the sounds of the city were muffled. Another man, younger, with kind brown eyes and an apron stained with coffee, stood by the open doors. "I saw you go down," the man in the apron said, wringing his hands. Right outside my cafe. I'm Ben, by the way. You come in for water sometimes." Nina recognized him. Ben's cafe was her one small daily luxury, a cup of ice water and 5 minutes of air conditioning on her break from the bookstore down the street. She tried to sit up, a fresh wave of shame and dizziness hitting her. "Thank you. I'm so sorry to cause a scene." "Don't you dare apologize," Ben said, his voice firm but warm. "The city's no place for a mama-to-be in this heat. The paramedics want to take you in to get checked out, just to be safe." Tears pricked Nina's eyes. The kindness of these strangers was a stark, painful contrast to the image seared into her memory. The black Bentley, the indifferent turn of her husband's head, the deliberate act of driving away. He had seen her. She knew he had. In that split second, she had seen the flicker of recognition in his eyes, followed by a chillingly familiar shudder of cold calculation. He had chosen the deal. He had chosen his image. He had chosen to leave her. The paramedic helped her lie back down. "We'll take you over to Northwestern Memorial, just a precaution." As the ambulance doors closed, blotting out Ben's concerned face, Nina stared at the ceiling, a single tear tracing a path down her temple. It wasn't the fall that hurt. It wasn't the heat or the exhaustion. It was the confirmation of a truth she had been running from for months. She had not just been an inconvenience to Dominic Vale. She had been disposable. And in that moment, something inside her, something that had clung to a foolish, microscopic sliver of hope, finally broke. The love she once felt for him curdled into something new, something hard and cold. It was the feeling of survival. She was utterly, terrifyingly alone. And for the first time, she was glad. Her child would never know the cold, gilded cage she had so narrowly escaped. She would make sure of it. Just a year ago, fainting on a street would have been an impossibility. Nina's life had been a meticulously curated performance piece, directed by Dominic. Their penthouse on the 85th floor of the Vale Tower had panoramic views of Lake Michigan, a sterile masterpiece of glass, steel, and Italian marble. Her days were scheduled down to the minute. 8 a.m. Pilates with a private instructor, 10 a.m. fittings for charity galas, lunch at Michelin-starred restaurants, afternoons spent on the boards of carefully selected non-profits. Dominic called it maintaining the brand. Nina called it slow suffocation. She had met Dominic at a university fundraiser. She was a bright, ambitious art history graduate, working at a small gallery. He was the charismatic real estate titan, a whirlwind of power and charm. He'd pursued her relentlessly, showering her with a kind of focused, intense attention that felt like sunlight. He loved her intelligence, he'd said, her passion for art, her independent spirit. It was only after the wedding that the sunlight began to cast long, cold shadows. Her independent spirit became something to be managed. Her job at the gallery was deemed unfitting. Her friends from college were unsophisticated. Her opinions on art were amusing anecdotes for his business dinners, but her opinions on his life or business were met with a condescending smile and a gentle, "Leave the strategy to me, darling." The power imbalance was a chasm between them. He held all the cards, the money, the social standing, the key to their apartment. She was a beautiful accessory, her value directly tied to her compliance and her reflection on him. He wasn't physically cruel, but his control was a boa constrictor, tightening so gradually she barely noticed until she could no longer breathe. He chose her clothes, vetted her calls, and curated her life until she no longer recognized the woman in the mirror. The pregnancy was her breaking point. She'd hoped, with a desperate, foolish optimism, that a child would change him, soften him. She remembered the moment she told him. They were in their cavernous living room, the city lights twinkling below like a fallen constellation. "Dominic, I'm pregnant," she'd said, her hands trembling as she held up the positive test. He didn't rush to her. He didn't kiss her or whoop with joy. He stood by the window, his back to her for a long moment. Then he turned, a slow, calculating smile spreading across his face. It wasn't the smile of a happy father-to-be. It was the smile of a king who had just secured his dynasty. "A Vale heir," he'd said, his voice filled with satisfaction. "Excellent. We'll need to adjust your public schedule. Announce it in Forbes. This is good for the brand." There was no us, no our baby. There was the Vale heir and the brand. In that moment, Nina knew this child would not be a person to him, but an asset. Another piece on his chessboard. She envisioned her son or daughter growing up in this sterile penthouse, taught that love was transactional, that people were tools, and that image was everything. The thought terrified her more than anything else. That night, she lay awake, listening to his even breathing beside her in their king-sized bed. The decision, when it finally crystallized, was terrifying but liberating. 2 weeks later, while he was on a business trip to Singapore, she acted. She didn't take the diamonds or the designer bags. She packed a single duffel bag with her old, pre-Dominic clothes, the few books she'd managed to keep, and all the cash she had in her personal account, a paltry $7,000, a monthly allowance he provided. She took a cab to a gritty, anonymous part of the city, found a small, dingy apartment for rent, and paid 3 months in advance with cash. She sold the last piece of jewelry Dominic had given her, a simple gold locket, for a few $100s. She bought a cheap, untraceable burner phone. She became Nina Ellis again, not Nina Vale. The first few weeks were a blur of fear and adrenaline. Every siren made her jump. Every well-dressed man on the street looked like one of Dominic's security team. But slowly, a new reality set in. It was a life of counting pennies, of eating ramen noodles, of sore feet from a job stocking shelves at a second-hand bookstore. But it was hers. The air in her tiny apartment, which smelled of dust and her neighbor's cooking, felt cleaner and easier to breathe than the climate-controlled, scent-diffused air of the penthouse. For the first time in years, Nina felt the quiet, thrilling hum of her own agency. She was building a life, not for a brand, but for her child. Nina's world shrank to a 5-block radius, but her spirit expanded in inverse proportion. Her apartment was on the 3rd floor of a walk-up building, with creaky stairs and questionable plumbing. The single window looked out onto a brick wall. Yet, waking up to the sound of her own alarm clock, not the hushed movements of a housekeeper, felt like a victory. Her job at Bound Again, the second-hand bookstore, was a haven. The owner, a perpetually flustered man named Leon, cared only that she was reliable and knew the alphabet. She spent her days surrounded by the comforting scent of old paper and ink, her hands dusty from forgotten histories and discarded adventures. Her swollen belly made shelving the lower books a challenge, but her co-workers, a sarcastic grad student named Zoe and a retired librarian named Helen, were always there to help, no questions asked. They didn't know her past, and for that, she was grateful. To them, she was just Nina, the quiet, pregnant woman with a sad, far-off look in her eyes sometimes. The heart of her new neighborhood was Ben's cafe. After her fainting spell, Ben had become a quiet guardian angel. He'd press a pastry into her hand with her cup of water, refusing payment. "For the little one," he'd say with a gruff smile. He was a widower in his late 40s, his own life etched with a quiet sorrow that he channeled into kindness. He never pried, but his cafe became her sanctuary. One afternoon, sitting at her usual small table by the window, Her friend Jade found her. Jade was the one friend from her old life who had seen through the facade. A fiery, no-nonsense journalist, she had despised Dominic from the start. "I've been trying your old number for weeks, Elle," Jade said, sliding into the chair opposite her, her eyes scanning Nina's worn-out dress and the tired lines around her eyes. "I was about to file a missing persons report. Then I got your text from this burner." Nina managed a weak smile. "Sorry, I had to unplug." "Unplug?" "Nina, you fell off the face of the earth," Jade said, her voice a mixture of relief and frustration. She reached across the table and squeezed Nina's hand. "Are you okay? Really?" Tears welled in Nina's eyes, and the whole story came tumbling out. The suffocation, the pregnancy announcement, the escape. She left out the part about fainting on the street and Dominic driving away. It felt too raw, too humiliating to say out loud. Jade listened, her expression hardening with every word. "That son of a bitch! I knew it. I knew he was a monster, wrapped in a cashmere coat." She looked at Nina's belly. "And you've been doing this all alone?" "I'm not alone," Nina said, a surprising strength in her voice. She gestured around the cafe. "Ben gives me free muffins. Helen from the bookstore is knitting the baby a blanket. Zoe is giving me her old bassinet. It's different." Jade studied her friend. The designer glow was gone, replaced by a pale exhaustion. But her eyes, once clouded with a polite, vacant haze, were clear and present. She was thinner, yet more substantial. "You're right," Jade said softly. "It is different. You look more like yourself than you have in years." The conversation turned to logistics. Jade insisted on setting up a secret bank account for her, transferring some of her own savings. "Don't argue," she commanded. "This is what friends do. We're your family now." Later that week, as Nina was organizing a stack of classic paperbacks at the bookstore, she felt a flutter in her belly, then a distinct, firm kick. She gasped, dropping a copy of Great Expectations. She placed both hands on her stomach, her breath catching in her throat as the baby kicked again, a tiny, powerful assertion of life. Tears streamed down her face. But for the first time in a long time, they were tears of pure, unadulterated joy. This was real. This tiny life inside her was real. She was no longer just running from Dominic. She was running toward this, toward a future she would build with her own 2 hands, a future rich in ways Dominic Vale could never comprehend. She had no fortune, no status, no power. But sitting on the dusty floor of a second-hand bookstore, she felt like the wealthiest woman in the world. Dominic Vale's world was one of meticulous order. His deals closed, his stocks rose, and his image remained flawless. The incident with Nina on the street was a jarring anomaly, a crack in the marble facade of his life. He'd spent the days since trying to seal it with the mortar of denial and deflection. The Takada deal, which should have been a triumphant celebration, felt hollow. The signing had been subdued. Mr. Takada's handshake was firm, but his eyes held a cool, appraising quality that unsettled Dominic. He had the distinct feeling he was being judged, not as a businessman, but as a man. The penthouse, once a symbol of his dominion, felt vast and silent. The silence was an accusation. It echoed in the spaces where Nina's quiet presence used to be. He found himself standing in her walk-in closet, surrounded by rows of exquisite dresses and shoes she had left behind. He ran a hand over a silk gown, the fabric cold and lifeless. He'd bought her these things to make her happy, to make her the perfect partner. Hadn't he given her everything? His older brother Ethan found him there one evening. Ethan Vale was the antithesis of Dominic. He managed the family's old money, the philanthropic foundations, the quiet, respectable side of the Vale dynasty. He saw Dominic's ruthless ambition as a vulgar betrayal of their heritage. "Still no word from her?" Ethan asked, leaning against the doorframe, his arms crossed. He was the only person Dominic couldn't intimidate. "She'll be back," Dominic said dismissively, turning away from the closet. "She's being dramatic." "Dramatic?" Ethan's voice was laced with scorn. "She's been gone for 2 months, Dominic. She's pregnant with your child, and you've done nothing. You haven't even hired a private investigator. You've just let her vanish, hoping it doesn't upset your business negotiations. The Takada deal is worth $2 billion. It required my full attention," Dominic snapped, his composure finally cracking. "And what is your wife worth?" Ethan shot back, stepping into the room. "I saw the look on your face that day, after you met with them. You were spooked. Something happened. What did you do?" Dominic's jaw tightened. He walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows, staring down at the city lights. "I'm handling it. By handling it, you mean ignoring it until it becomes a PR problem?" Ethan's voice was relentless. "You see people as assets, Dominic. Liabilities to be managed. You always have. But Nina is not a stock price. She's a person. A wonderful, bright person who you have systematically hollowed out to fit your narrative. And now you're surprised she's gone?" A surge of rage, hot and defensive, rose in Dominic's chest. "You know nothing about my marriage. I know I saw my brother turn into a cold, calculating machine who values a building more than his own family. Dad would be ashamed. The mention of their father was a low blow, and it landed. Their father had been a formidable but fair man, a builder of things, yes, but a builder of family first." Dominic flinched. "Get out, Ethan," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. Ethan sighed, the anger draining from him, replaced by a weary sadness. "Find her, Dominic. Not for the brand. Not for the shareholders. Find her because she's your wife, and she is carrying your child. Find her before you lose the last part of your soul." After Ethan left, the silence of the penthouse pressed in on Dominic, heavier than before. He was haunted. Not by guilt, that was an emotion he rarely accessed, but by the memory of the look in Nina's eyes. It wasn't just fear or desperation. It was recognition. She had seen him, and in that same instant, she had seen through him. She had seen the calculation, the cowardice. He walked to his bar and poured a glass of expensive scotch, the amber liquid doing nothing to warm the chill inside him. Ethan was wrong. He wasn't losing his soul. He was just protecting his empire. That's what a king had to do. Sacrifices were necessary. But as he stared at his reflection in the dark window, a face he barely recognized, gaunt with stress, he couldn't shake the feeling that the sacrifice he'd made on that sun-drenched street hadn't been Nina. It had been himself. The crack in the marble was spreading. A week later, the first tremor hit. It started not as an earthquake, but as a faint whisper on a niche gossip blog. The post was titled, "Chicago's King Vale, an Empty Castle." It was speculative, filled with innuendo about Nina Vale's conspicuous absence from the social scene. It mentioned that sources close to the couple hadn't seen her in months, and that Dominic's team was being evasively tight-lipped. The post was accompanied by a grainy, long-lens photo of Dominic getting into his Bentley. In the background, blurry but unmistakable, was the figure of a pregnant woman on the ground, a small crowd gathering around her. The caption read, "Is this a coincidence or a sign of trouble in paradise? One thing's for sure, where there's smoke, there's usually a billion-dollar fire." Dominic's PR head, a ruthless woman named Miranda, was in his office within the hour, tablet in hand. "This is a brush fire, Dominic. We need to kill it before it becomes an inferno. Issue a denial. A statement about privacy, Dominic said, his eyes fixed on the blurry image of Nina. He could almost feel the heat from the pavement. With what? They'll ask where she is. We've been peddling the European villa story for 2 months. It won't hold up to real scrutiny, Miranda said, her tone clinical. We need her. We need a photo op. You, her belly, smiling. We need to control the narrative, and right now, we have no narrative. The word control jolted him. He was losing it. The situation was spiraling, becoming a public spectacle. The one thing he abhorred. Find her, he ordered, the words tasting like ash. It was the same command his brother had given him. But the motive was entirely different. Ethan had wanted him to find his wife. Dominic wanted to find his asset. I've already engaged a private investigator, Miranda said, anticipating him. The best, a discreet firm. They'll need a recent photo, personal details, known associates. The search began. Dominic, the man who could track global financial markets to the second, was now using his immense resources to hunt for his own wife. The irony was lost on him, buried under a mountain of anxiety. The investigators were professionals, feeding him sterile updates. Possible lead in the Wicker Park area. Interviewing a friend named Jade Ramsey. She's not cooperating. Meanwhile, the story grew. The initial blog post was picked up by more reputable online magazines. The blurry photo was sharpened by digital experts. The narrative began to solidify. Dominic Vale, the powerful tycoon, and his mysteriously vanished pregnant wife. In the bookstore, Zoe slid her phone across the counter to Nina. Hey, isn't this that big-shot developer? The guy who owns half the city? Nina looked down. Her own face, pixelated and indistinct, stared back at her from the news article. Her heart hammered against her ribs. They were looking for her. Not him. Not Dominic, the man who loved her. But them. His team. The machine. She wasn't a person to be found, but a problem to be solved. A PR crisis to be managed. Panic, cold and suffocating, seized her. This little world she had built, this fragile piece, was about to be shattered. He would find her, drag her back into the spotlight, and parade her around to save his reputation. Her child would be born into that circus. That evening, Jade showed up at her apartment, her face grim. They came to my office, Nina. 2 men in suits, PIs, asking questions about you. I told them to get lost and called my lawyer, but they're sniffing around. It's only a matter of time. Nina wrapped her arms around her stomach, a primal need to protect her baby overwhelming her. What do I do, Jade? I can't go back. I won't. You're not going back, Jade said fiercely. But you can't hide forever. He's using his money to corner you. The only way to beat a bully with power is to take the power away from him. How? Nina whispered, her voice trembling. You stop hiding, Jade said, her eyes meeting Nina's. You get in front of the story. You tell it yourself. Your own words. Your own truth. You think he's controlling the narrative? Rip it out of his hands. The idea was terrifying. It meant stepping into the light she'd been so desperate to avoid. It meant confronting him, not as a runaway wife, but as his equal. It meant fighting. For the first time, Nina considered it. The fear was still there, but beneath it, the hard, cold ember of survival that had been forged on that sidewalk began to glow. He had left her on the ground. Maybe it was time she got up and showed him she could stand on her own. The investigator was good. It wasn't a dramatic showdown, but a quiet, mundane discovery. He simply followed the trail of kindness Nina had left in her wake. A tip from a pharmacist, where she'd filled a prescription for prenatal vitamins. A confirmation from a grocer, who remembered the polite, pregnant woman who always paid in cash. The trail led directly to Ben's cafe, Dominic arrived on a grey, overcast afternoon. He didn't come in his Bentley, but in a nondescript black sedan. He wore a simple dark sweater and trousers, an attempt at looking unassuming that failed utterly. His aura of wealth and power was a physical presence, sucking the air out of the cozy cafe the moment he stepped inside. Nina was wiping down a table, her back to the door. She moved with the slow, deliberate grace of late pregnancy. Ben was behind the counter, polishing a glass. He saw Dominic first, and his friendly demeanor instantly vanished, replaced by a wary stillness. The tension in the room was what made Nina turn, and there he was. For a moment, they just stared at each other, across the small room. The patrons faded away. The clatter of cutlery and the hiss of the espresso machine disappeared. It was just the two of them, a universe of unspoken words and betrayals stretching between them. He looked tired, she noticed, a detail that surprised her. The ironclad composure was still there, but there were fine lines of strain around his eyes she'd never seen before. He took a step forward. Nina, his voice, the one that used to command boardrooms and charm investors, sounded hollow in the warm, coffee-scented air. Nina placed a hand on her belly, a gesture that was both protective and defiant. She straightened up, her spine stiff. The scared, fleeing woman was gone. A mother stood in her place. "Dominic, you shouldn't be here. We need to talk," he said, his gaze flicking around the cafe with distaste. "Not here. Let's go somewhere private." "No," she said. The word was quiet, but it was made of steel. "I like it here. These are my friends." She glanced at Ben, who was now standing with his arms crossed, a silent, unmovable sentinel. Dominic's facade began to crack. A flicker of frustration crossed his face. "Don't be ridiculous. You're creating a media storm. Your picture is everywhere. You need to come home." "Home?" The word came out as a bitter laugh. "You mean the 85th floor, the display case? That's not a home, Dominic. It's a showroom, and I am not one of your exhibits. I'll give you anything you want," he said, lowering his voice, trying to regain control. It was a negotiation. A new apartment, a bigger allowance, whatever it takes to fix this, and that was it. The final, clarifying moment. He wasn't here for her. He wasn't here because he was worried or because he missed her. He was here to fix this, to manage the problem. "You want to fix this?" she said, her voice rising slightly, infused with a pain so deep it sounded like anger. "Let's talk about fixing this. Where were you, Dominic, when I was on the sidewalk? When I fainted 100 feet from your car? I saw you. You saw me." The accusation hung in the air, raw and undeniable. Dominic flinched as if struck. The color drained from his face. For the first time, he looked truly cornered, stripped of his power. The Takadas were in the car," he stammered, the excuse sounding pathetic even to his own ears. It was a critical moment. It was complicated. Complicated? Nina's voice trembled with a righteous fury she didn't know she possessed. "No, it was simple. You saw your pregnant wife collapse on the street, and you chose to protect a business deal. You chose to protect your image. You left me there. Strangers helped me, Dominic. Strangers. A man who owns the small cafe you're standing in called an ambulance for me. A man who has nothing showed more humanity in 5 minutes than you have shown me in 2 years." Ben took a half step forward, not aggressively, but simply to stand nearer to her, a quiet show of solidarity. Dominic looked from Nina's fierce, tear-streaked face to Ben's steady gaze. In that moment, he saw the chasm between his world and hers. He dealt in billions of dollars, in leverage and contracts. This man dealt in coffee and kindness. And right now, in this small, insignificant cafe, Ben was the richer man. Dominic was bankrupt. He had come here with a strategy, with talking points prepared by his PR team. He was supposed to be conciliatory but firm, to bring her back into the fold. But her words, her truth, had shattered his defenses. There was nothing he could offer her. Money couldn't buy what he had destroyed. An apology couldn't undo the image of his car driving away. Defeated, he turned without another word and walked out of the cafe. He didn't look back. As he stepped into the grey afternoon, the door swinging shut behind him, he felt a profound and unfamiliar emptiness. It wasn't the sting of a failed negotiation. It was the agony of a wound he had inflicted upon himself. He hadn't just lost an argument. He had lost her. And in the chilling silence of his own heart, he was beginning to understand that he may have lost everything that ever truly mattered. The confrontation in the cafe was the first domino. The rest of Dominic's empire began to fall with breathtaking speed. 2 days later, Dominic received a terse, formal email from Mr. Takada's office. They were pulling out of the lakefront development deal. The official reason cited was unforeseen shifts in market confidence. But the personal note attached from Mr. Takada himself was the real blow. It was short and brutal. Mr. Vale, a man who cannot honor his family, cannot be trusted to honor a contract. The foundation of a skyscraper is paramount, but the foundation of a man's character is more so. We have found yours to be unstable. The $2 billion deal, the pinnacle of his career, evaporated. Just like that. The news hit the financial wires an hour later. Vale Industries' stock plummeted 17% by the closing bell. The board of directors, once his loyal sycophants, called for an emergency meeting. They smelled blood in the water. His blood. He sat in the boardroom, the same room where he had commanded with absolute authority, and felt like a stranger. The faces looking back at him were filled with accusation and fear. They weren't just questioning his handling of the PR crisis. They were questioning his judgment, his stability, his very identity as a leader. His brother Ethan was there, representing the family's stake. He remained silent through most of the proceedings, his expression grim. As the meeting adjourned with a vote to form a special committee to oversee Mr. Vale's executive decisions, effectively stripping him of his autonomy, Ethan walked with him to the elevator. "They're circling," Dominic said, his voice hollow. "What did you expect?" Ethan replied, his voice devoid of triumph, only a deep, resounding sadness. "You build an empire on an image of strength and control. The moment that image cracks, the whole thing comes down. You did this, Dominic, every step of the way. When you isolated Nina, when you drove her away, when you left her on that sidewalk, you laid the dynamite, and your own arrogance lit the fuse." Dominic had no response. The fight was gone. The defensive anger had been replaced by a vast, echoing numbness. That night, he walked through the penthouse. The cleaning staff had been, but it felt derelict. It was a mausoleum of his success. Trophies and awards gleamed on shelves, testaments to deals he had won and rivals he had crushed. He picked up a heavy crystal obelisk, the Developer of the Year award. It felt weightless, meaningless. He stood before the great window, looking down at the city he had sought to conquer. It looked alien to him now, a web of lights connecting people he didn't know, filled with a life he couldn't access. His world had been the view from the top. He'd never considered the lives on the streets below, unless they were in the way of a new development. The image of Nina on the pavement returned to him, but this time it was different. He didn't see it from the detached safety of his Bentley. He felt the jarring impact of her body on the concrete. He felt the searing heat, the blinding sun. He felt the panic of a pregnant woman, alone and terrified, as the world went black. For the first time, he felt her pain, not his inconvenience. A sob, raw and ugly, tore from his throat. It was a sound he hadn't made since he was a child. He sank to the cold marble floor, the crystal award slipping from his grasp and shattering into 1,000 pieces. The sound echoed the breaking of his own hubris. He had lost the deal. He had lost control of his company. He had lost his brother's respect. And he had lost his wife. He had meticulously built a kingdom of glass and steel, only to discover he was its sole, miserable prisoner. Rock bottom wasn't a financial figure, it was this profound, crushing isolation, born entirely from his own choices. The reckoning had come, and in the ruins of his perfect life, Dominic Vale finally began to weep. 3 months passed. The Chicago autumn arrived, painting the city in hues of amber and rust. The media frenzy surrounding the Vales had died down, replaced by newer, more sensational stories. Nina gave birth to a healthy baby girl on a crisp October morning. She named her Lily. Lily Ellis. Holding her daughter for the first time, Nina felt a love so fierce and absolute it recalibrated her entire world. Every hardship, every moment of fear had led her to this small, perfect miracle. Her life wasn't defined by what she had run from anymore, but by the tiny, trusting hand wrapped around her finger. Her life in Wicker Park had settled into a comfortable rhythm. Her apartment was crowded with baby things, most of them second-hand gifts from her new community. Helen from the bookstore was a doting honorary grandmother. Jade was the ever-present cool aunt. And Ben. Ben was simply a friend, a good, steady friend who would drop off soup when he knew she was too tired to cook and who could make Lily giggle like no one else. There was an unspoken warmth between them, a gentle possibility that neither was in a hurry to define. For now, friendship was more than enough. She never heard from Dominic. After the news of his professional downfall broke, a part of her had expected him to make one last, desperate attempt to reclaim his life, with her in it. But there was only silence. Then, one afternoon, a package arrived. It wasn't from a courier, but sent by certified mail. It was a thick, simple manila envelope with a handwritten address. She recognized the sharp, decisive penmanship instantly. Her heart stuttered. With trembling hands, she put Lily down in her bassinet and opened it. Inside were 2 things, a sheaf of legal documents and a single handwritten letter. She read the letter first. Nina, there are no words to properly express the depth of my regret. An apology from me has no value, as I have proven my words to be worthless. I know that now. I don't write this letter to ask for your forgiveness, as I know I haven't earned it and may never earn it. I write it only to offer an explanation, not an excuse. My entire life has been a construction, built to project strength and hide a deep-seated fear of failure. I saw people, including you, as parts of that construction. I valued you, not for who you were, but for how you reflected on me. It was a profound and unforgivable moral failure. The day I saw you on the street, I made a choice born of that cowardice. In choosing my image, I destroyed my reality. I see that now. Losing everything, the deal, the company's reputation, you, was not a tragedy. It was a consequence, a necessary one. I have been in therapy. I have stepped down as CEO of Vale Industries. I am trying to learn how to be a man, not a brand. The enclosed documents are for our daughter. I have established an irrevocable trust in her name. The funds are substantial enough that she will never have to worry about anything. Crucially, I am not the trustee. Your friend, Jade Ramsey, and my brother, Ethan, have agreed to act as co-trustees, and they alone will manage it until she is of age. I have no access and no control. This is not a tool for leverage. It is not a gift to you. It is the one thing I can give our daughter that is clean of my influence. It is a chance for her future, a future I hope you will build for her, far away from the life I would have given her. I will not contact you again. I will not interfere in your life or hers. My only hope is that one day she will know she has a father who, having failed her completely, is at least trying to become a man worthy of her existence. He is just not there yet. Dominic. Nina read the letter 3 times, tears blurring the ink. It was not the letter of the man she had married. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a brutal, unflinching self-awareness. It was the sound of a man who had walked through fire and been irrevocably changed by the flames. She looked at the legal documents, saw the signatures of Jade and Ethan, and understood. This was not a ploy. This was an act of surrender, an act of penance. He was giving her the one thing she had fought so hard to win: complete freedom. Forgiveness was a distant, hazy shoreline she couldn't yet see. The wounds were too deep. But for the first time, the hard knot of anger and betrayal in her chest began to loosen. She looked over at her daughter, sleeping peacefully, bathed in the soft afternoon light. Lily's future was secure, protected not by Dominic's power, but by his absence. Nina folded the letter and placed it in a small wooden box with her most treasured keepsakes. The future was still an unwritten page. Perhaps one day, a different version of Dominic would be a part of it, in some small way. Perhaps not. But as she picked up her daughter and held her close, breathing in her sweet, milky scent, Nina knew one thing for certain. Her new beginning was finally, truly hers. What a journey. We've seen Nina's incredible transformation from a trophy wife in a gilded cage to a fierce, independent mother who found richness not in wealth, but in community and love. We witnessed Dominic Vale, a man at the pinnacle of power, make a single, heartless decision that caused his entire empire and his soul to shatter. His path to redemption is long and uncertain, but it begins with a single, selfless act. Their story reminds us that true strength isn't about control, but courage, and that true wealth isn't what you own, but what you're willing to sacrifice for what you love. Can a man who has caused so much pain truly change? Can betrayal on that level ever be forgiven? We'd love to hear what you think. Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story moved you, please give it a thumbs up, share it with a friend, and don't forget to subscribe for more emotional and dramatic real-life stories. Thank you for watching.